Anybody, Steve, so you should go to the left, right? Yeah, sure.
This panel is about China. We changed the battery a minute ago, so I assume that's the reason. Is it working now?
Yeah, it's working now.
You need an internal combustion engine in there.
We're going to be talking about China. Nobody should ignore China. All the companies in our portfolio should think about China as a potential market. You know, 1.3 billion people, 500 million middle class, number one exporter in the world. China is beating record after record, including the fact that over the next few years, they will invest somewhere between $600 and $700 billion in clean tech. So for those companies here that are in clean tech, this is a market that you should really look at. So we have assembled a fairly large panel, and I told them before that they have each 4 minutes and 32 seconds to speak. I have Steve Liu, who is the CEO of Stion, and sitting next to him is Chet Farris, the CEO of Stion. Then Don Runkle, the CEO of EcoMotor. Jennifer Holmgren, who is the CEO of LanzaTech. And finally, Carmen Chang, who is with Wilson Sonsini. So the way I would like to do it is to have each one of these panelists make a short presentation about either their experience in China, their aspirations to move to China, and after that, hopefully, we'll still have some time for questions. So first, I'd like to start with you, Jennifer.
Great. Can you hear me? Maybe not. Okay, great. So let me do just a 1-second explanation of LanzaTech so you understand why we felt like our first business opportunity was in China. Our company ferments CO-containing gas streams and converts those gas streams to fuels and chemicals. You're probably used to thinking of CO, carbon monoxide, as being part of synthesis gas, which is made from gasification of waste. But actually, our organism will also work in a hydrogen-free environment, which means a true waste gas CO from an industrial facility. And one of the biggest places where you'll find CO is steel mills. And more than 50% of the world's steel is made in China. So it's kind of a no-brainer to go to China if you have a technology that helps the steel sector. What we've done is we formed a joint venture with the help of Carmen with Bao Steel. Bao Steel is the largest steel company in China, and they also happen to be the world's second largest. So we're not just playing with anybody, we're playing with the leader. And I think that's really, really important when you think about going into China. This issue of IP protection and everything else, which Carmen will speak about, I think it's just like everywhere else. If you work with a big multinational or a company that has aspirations for that, they have a reputation to maintain. So they'll be much more guarded and much more careful. We are a minority share in that JV. I'm very comfortable being a minority share. In China, having the Chinese partner be the majority, there's so much interaction with the government that I think we're able to get a larger pie, which means a smaller piece of a larger pie. I'm very comfortable with that. So I think being a minority in China is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. There's a lot of people that will give you advice on what to do, what not to do in China, and what the rules are. I went in there, everybody told you equity joint venture. Well, we didn't. We have a contractual joint venture, thanks to Carmen. And that is much better for our company. The other thing that people will always tell you is exclusivity, that they always want exclusivity. From our perspective as a technology company, giving away exclusivity means you've basically given away part of the pie. And that may or may not be good. In my mind, it's not necessarily good to give that away, more because you enable your competition, because the day you tell a company that you can't work with them because you've given exclusivity to somebody else, what you end up doing is letting your competition partner with them. So what we did, and I think it's worth pointing out with Bao Steel is in China, the steel sector is divided into the large players and the small players. You want me to stop, right?
Yes.
Okay, we let them have the small players, and anyways, that's good for us too because they can access them, and I'll shut up.
Interested can hear more about steel and China.
Okay, done.
Don, you were at Delphi when some large operations in China, and you're also now trying to do something in China. Tell us a little bit what you're doing with EcoMotor. Maybe a couple of words about EcoMotor. Not everybody knows about it.
Okay. Yeah, my experience was at Delphi. We put about 15 or so plants into China, basically at the time supporting GM's entry into there with SAIC and others. So we've got a lot of experience there. I've got experience in wholly owned enterprises, minority enterprises, majority enterprises, and I can tell you can do all of those things right and wrong. So I don't think there's any one way to be successful there. I think it comes back to who your partner is. In my case, I was majority in one plant, and I couldn't get in the plant because the two owners, me and the other guy, had different views of what the business was about. He wanted to run an employment agency, and I wanted to run a parts company. So anyway, EcoMotor is interested in China. We're an engine company, so high efficiency. China, as you would know, is the #1 automotive market today, upwards of about 18 million, 19 million vehicles a year. They're going to grow probably to 40 million units a year, which is about 3 times what we would normally have in a good year. During that time, they're going to put up 40 more engine plants, another 20 million engines a year. And they don't have a big infrastructure now. They have more or less older technology. Some of the new ones from Volkswagen, General Motors, others are new, but there's still not a big infrastructure yet over there. So we would like those 40 engine plants to be OPOC, our technology in those plants, whether it be from Toyota or General Motors or Honda or whoever else is there. We have a deal with a Chinese company right now, Jianding. It's public. This is a non-exclusive agreement. After about a year's worth of negotiation, we talked them off the ledge of exclusivity. At the end of the day, we just had to walk away and said, we're not going to do exclusive. So it came down to basically that. It started with a letter of intent. We now have a signed contract to deliver some prototype engines by early next year, the end of this year. A second contract is queued up for what they're very interested in, a smaller engine. And this, in the LOI, would signal leading to a joint venture with them, probably with us in a minority stake, in exchange for our IP, as well as a low-cost manufacturing source for our engines that we could sell to other people along with them selling to their customers. So that is up and running now. They've assigned people to us here in Michigan, in Allen Park, where our headquarters are. So it's just the beginning of a relationship. But so far, we like the company. Our chairman is also the inventor and the innovator of the engine, has a good relationship with the chairman of Jianding, so I like the way that is going. And I think my experience is, again, we'll see how that goes and how the IP is protected over time.
Thank you very much. Chet is the CEO of Stion, and Stion has a relationship already in Taiwan for, I think, now a year and a half, and a license and actually production facility over there. Now you're looking at a possibility of doing something in China. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, our initial deal in Asia was with TSMC. There was sort of 4 elements. They made a large equity investment in the company. We had a technology transfer and license agreement whereby we licensed them under some very specific terms, a portion of our technology, a joint development agreement, and then an offtake supply agreement. Fortunately in that case, in dealing with issues, TSMC was a very large company with a very sound set of infrastructure. Given the nature of their business as a core foundry and the nature of their customers, where they take their IP of their customers and make products for them, I think their systems were very robust and led to a pretty easy structure in terms of dealing with the issues. And so that's ongoing. But as we looked at the Asia region, and of course China, as Pierre had mentioned earlier, is a big potential market. They're adding today, from an energy perspective, about a power plant a week, just to put it in perspective, and now have surpassed the U.S. in terms of energy consumption. So we surely see that as an opportunity going forward for PV. Unfortunately, mainland China is a little more difficult because I think, again, finding the right partner with the right infrastructure, making sure that you have adequate access to capital, appropriate infrastructure support, not only for things like electricity, but materials and supplies. Dealing with the language and cultural barriers, as we know from TSMC, is not always easy, as an example. How you construct that in a way that you don't adversely affect your exit strategy, or in the case if your partner has an exit strategy, how does that get that folded in, as well as the IP issues. So we've spent quite a bit of time. I would surely recommend that you don't do it alone, that you would find a partner like Wilson Sonsini to help you with this. I think Jennifer also mentioned there's a lot of people that will give you a lot of advice. I'm not sure it's always good advice. So we have been in discussion for about 6 months and continue to work through those relationships and issues. So clearly a huge market opportunity for growth, but not an unchallenging market in terms of dealing with all these open issues.
Thank you. And then Steve Liu, who is the CEO of Stion. I always have a tough time pronouncing that, but CEO and CEO is difficult. But Steve is Chinese, and before he joined Stion, was the CEO of a very large Chinese company, over $1 billion in revenue. And now at Stion, we're looking at setting up an operation in China, and Steve is leading the charge. So Steve, tell us a little bit, what are your opportunities and also the problems that you see as you're trying to set up that operation?
Yeah, good afternoon. My experience with, maybe just a little bit about myself so that you can see the perspective that I can bring to this discussion. I was born in Beijing. I spent all my 16 years in Beijing, and I got educated in the United States. And then the career took me in semiconductor industry from Silicon Valley, and then I worked a few years in Japan and a few years in Sydney, Australia, and then about 7 years in Shanghai, China. In fact, when I joined the semiconductor industry, Pierre was the chairman of the board of Cypress. That was my first job in 1984. Talking about large-scale manufacturing, when I worked in Silicon Valley, we were building at the time factories in San Jose, and then we built a factory in Round Rock of Texas. But until I really moved to Japan to see how this large-scale factory were built, and how the execution was so precise and so refined, and then I realized that there's a lot of, not just innovation on the technology itself, there's a lot of manufacturing-related or execution-related technology. Japanese fully guarded this part of the know-how as a trade secret. They're not like American company. American company, you talk about outsourcing, they really outsource essentially all manufacturing, right, to overseas, to Asia. But a Japanese company have never adopted that kind of strategy. What they do is they maintain the manufacturing domestically, and then they only outsource those kind of outdated technology, or there's a surplus capacity required, they will outsource those. When the economy changes, they will always come back to the Japan domestic setup. So by doing that, they can always invest into this technology development. So they always maintain the state-of-art manufacturing practice within the company itself. I think if you really, because we're a startup company now, I'm working for Stion, we're looking for manufacturing strategy. Really the challenge there is you don't have a U.S. manufacturing base, right? When you do outsourcing, you find a factory or established factory in China. You really have to view this as very long-term, because what I find is you can build a very nice, large manufacturing facility, and the people can execute extremely well. You can get a very low cost, but your advantages will be very rapidly, it's not sustainable, you're rapidly disappearing because your competitors are doing almost exactly the same thing. So the cost cutting to the certain level will not be any from the wages or from materials, will have to come from innovation. You have to come from an upgrade of the technology. And with that, you have to keep that in mind. So it's not going to be just setting a low-cost fab site and then be done with it. Yeah, because the cost cutting, the only this level you can do, and your competitor are doing the same thing. So you really need to continue to plan for the investing in the technology, investing in innovation that can further bring down the cost. I think that's one thing that I learned. And the second thing is if you run a very large manufacturing in China, you really I think you can gain a very high productivity as compared anywhere in the world. Due to the fact that I think the Chinese labor force or engineering forces, they're used to the kind of what we call a KPI, right? Key operating indices. Essentially, you monitor every single thing there is that can be measured in your manufacturing or technology or any marketing and sales program, so that you really can measure every corner of your organization with the numbers. And then you have the trend chart on this, so you can be able to talk about it. So union will never be an issue on this. When I was running an operation in Australia, the moment you start trending this kind of data, make it available to the management or to the employee to talk about it, union will be in the way in this, because they are thinking you are monitoring this performance up to the certain minutes or to the hours. But in China, it's not that a big deal. So you can gain a productivity out of an organization with a very smart laborers, with a productive workforce. Union rarely in the way. You hear some issues from Japanese large automakers these days. They're sourcing the parts out of China, has some strikes, but by and large, I think that's just a spot problem. And quality should not be an issue. You can get a very high quality product out of China. What is the issue? I think there are a few things maybe you keep in mind. One is, for example, if your employee sometimes can be a bit of a jumpy, because this employee, if you keep in mind that you're 30 years old or younger, they are all from this so-called one child per family. So these kids are very educated, they're smart, but they really have not much of a, how do I say it, a spirit enduring some hardship. If the company does have a hardship, you have to squeeze the employee out of productivity. Sometimes these people are easy to have a high turnover problem. I think that's one issue that I always have trouble with it. And I think if you do have want to set up a fab, I will be glad to talk to you throughout these sessions, share some experience with you.
I do remember that we had key performance indices at Cyprus. Maybe you ignored them, but we used to have them. So anyway, Carmen Chang is an attorney with Wilson Sonsini. She is the head of the China practice. And I asked her if she could say a few words specifically on the subject of IP, not just the IP transferred from the US to China, but also whenever IP is generated in China, how protectable is it? Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm trying very hard to give a very, very brief presentation as instructed. And a lot of people ask me, is there rule of law in China when we start talking about IP protection? And I feel that it's too complicated a question to discuss, and we can talk about that sometime, maybe over drinks. But what I want to talk about is what I think is the policy of the Chinese government towards intellectual property. And I think the most important thing, I think, for all of us to understand when we go to China is that the goal of the Chinese government is to make China into an innovative society. That is their goal. It covers many, many areas. I think John Hennessy today talked about innovative ecosystem, and I think they're very focused on it. And they have the best minds really focused on all the different aspects of what you need in order to create an innovative society. But for this discussion, I'm just going to focus on IP. And I'm going to make 2 points. First is that it is the policy of the Chinese government to combine a stepped-up protection of intellectual property, in particular, the protection of patent rights, through the strengthen the injunctive relief for IP protection, more sophisticated trained judges. In 2010, there were 4,000 patent infringement cases filed in the Chinese courts, with approximately 8 to 10% of it being one of the parties being a non-Chinese party. And I think that says something. And I think people generally say that in the big cities where most of these IP cases are, that it's a pretty fair system. Because, I'm not getting into a whole political discussion about it, but it is in China's government's interest to protect intellectual property, because they recognize that in order to become an innovative society, they must be a society in which people will not be afraid to bring their IP to China. But they have combined a stepped-up protection of patent rights and intellectual property rights with laws as well as concrete guidelines for how to enable China and the Chinese parties to own and have access to more of the background technology as well as technology itself in a completely legal and in a legal way. So, for example, there is a new law in China, of which there are exceptions, which requires that if you enter a joint venture with a Chinese company, the new technology developed by that joint venture must be owned by the joint venture. Now, that's the law. Now, there are exceptions to that law, and depending on how much they need the technology, you can get exceptions. But that's the general law. And as somebody that have negotiated many of these contracts, you can tell after the first 3 that there's some guidelines there, and that somebody in the government has thought through what are the aspects of these licenses and these agreements that they want. But they're very flexible, but you can tell that there are certain things that they want, which will enable them to train their people, have access to the technology, and to own as much of it as possible, so that there could be a completely legal way whereby a body of intellectual property can exist in different areas. All right, I have to stop.
I was trying to keep 5 minutes for questions,
Okay.
and I have 4 minutes and 45 seconds, so I'm not doing too badly. Any questions to our panelists? Yes?
Hi, I have a question about site selection in China. We think we understand what's happening in the U.S. and what's happening in Europe, and there are a collective set of rules, but then there are negotiations with local governments and so forth. Can you comment a little bit about the promise and pitfalls of the different regions in China and how you might go about that?
I think picking your partner and picking where you want to be is one of the most important things.
I'd like you to comment, and I'd like Steve to comment.
Okay, so I think that's one of the most important things. And I think the key to doing that is, first, the government has designated certain areas of the country for certain kinds of technology. Secondly, it's who you know in those areas and who your partner is. That's going to be key in picking the site.
Is there much difference between the regions?
Yes, I think China has so much evolved in the past 15, 20 years. I think for selecting a site, it's much better off to select a second-tier region, a second-tier city, maybe adjacent to a large city, or even third-tier city. That will get a much better preferred treatment. I think in a major industrial area where major cities are, most of the government has their own place for already. They have so many large projects going on, you will see much less attention. But second or third-tier city, you will get some very good deal out of it. Yes, I think the cost of doing this manufacturing, if it's manufacturing related, is getting much higher in the major city. You really have to better off, to stay away from the major city. And the government does have lots of incentives for those second or third tier city to give incentive to set up the operations.
Well, you know that China is no longer the cheapest place to manufacture. Indonesia and Vietnam, I think maybe there are others are less expensive. Jennifer?
Just to make a comment, I'm not sure that what I do is completely aligned. Steve, you're interested in manufacturing and we're interested in high tech. And I actually find that being in the big centers like Shanghai is actually helpful from an IP protection perspective. And I also find that if you're really high technology, there's these parks that are within the large cities which actually want to grab all the new tech, that they give you these tremendous incentives if you have something that's unique. So I think it depends on what you want to do and how you think about what you do. Carmen knows what.
Other questions? Well, I have one question for the panel, is that, China, especially recently, the Chinese government has talked a lot about innovation in China and spending a lot of money with very mixed results, in my opinion, because I have the strong feeling that liberty and innovation work together, and when you have a very autocratic government, it doesn't encourage innovation. So what's your opinion about that? Maybe, Carmen, you want to comment?
I want to say that one of the things that I think China must overcome, which I think they recognize, is that to have a genuinely innovative society, people must not be afraid to make mistakes. And the problem of a society that's very controlled and very regimented is that people are afraid of making mistakes. And without eliminating that as such a critical part of the culture, it's very hard for China to be genuinely innovative. And I've spoken with a lot of people in China about the importance of make a mistake. That's the great thing of Silicon Valley. You can make a mistake, learn from it, and move on.
Yeah, I think when I was holding that job, responsibility in China, I had a lot of opportunity to attend very high-level government meetings to listen to their opinions and give my opinion. But what I see is that the government has a very strong push to push from this industry across the board, from a very labor-intensive industry later on to a so-called capital-intensive industry, and now they're pushing into a so-called a knowledge-intensive industry. And because they realize that the resources used as a world manufacturing base, it is sometimes punishing to the country, to the environment, to the thing. So they're really pushing hard for the knowledge-intensive. I think your experience with a certain sector of the industry, they are encouraging to move into the center of the city. That's true. That's true for Google. That's true for lots of companies. But
Don,
for manufacturing, yeah.
Don, in your area, do you expect your partner to provide some innovation, or is it all coming from EcoMotor, from Detroit?
Yeah, I would say we're not counting on them to deliver, frankly, any innovation. So it's market access. They have manufacturing facilities. They have signed people to us. They are building a tech center, basically, for our engine, which is in economic development zone outside of Shanghai. But so far, the relationship is just budding, so we'll see how that goes. I did have experience at Delphi. We created a venture with Tsinghua University to create a automotive design office there, quite a large one. And I think that was helpful, but it was mostly teaching Chinese people about modern automotive stuff. So there was not much innovation. I would agree that that's an area that they'll need to focus on there. I also think, just my observation is, they are chasing some technologies that might turn out to be high cost, and you have to be careful of that if that introduces that cost into your overall competitiveness of a country. So sometimes I think they'll learn that the hard way.
That's all the time we have for. I want to thank our panel. Thank you very much.
6 from now on.
Go ahead. No, I have to stay. Go ahead.